a tired column of British soldiers marches down a New England road, harassed by colonial militia musket fire from behind almost every stone wall and tree along their route. Having just burned supplies for the rebellious Continental Army, the British are desperate to return to the relative safety of the coast and to return to their home base before taking further casualties. This April incursion inland has faced opposition almost from the very start, thanks to an early warning that gave colonial militiamen time to assemble. For those of you who think that I'm talking about the Battle of Lexington and Concord, well, guess again. In April 1777, British troops under General William Tryon launched a raid on Danbury, which resulted in fighting right here in Wilton. I'm Wilton Historical Society Associate Curator Nick Foster, and recently the Society was fortunate enough to be able to display a fascinating document vital to the events of Tryon's raid. Recently acquired by Wilton resident and expert in historical documents John Reznikoff, the object in question is correspondence between colonial generals David Wooster and Gold Selleck Silliman. On this episode of History is Here, I sat down with John to discuss the significance of this object, and we'll explore how Tryon's raid affected Wilton, Connecticut, and the Revolution. Now, please excuse me while I put on something that makes me, well, a little less of a target. Fresh off the successful capture of New York City in the fall of 1776, General William Tryon was tasked with crushing support for the rebellion along the Hudson River in western Connecticut. His first target in the spring of 1777 was a colonial supply depot located in Danbury. His expedition, which included 1,800 men and a small number of supporting artillery, sailed from New York into Long Island Sound on April 22nd. The British fleet landed 3 days later on the evening of April 25th at Campo Beach, now part of the town of Westport. They quickly moved north and encountered only a handful of colonial militiamen who offered minimal resistance. However, by now, the alarm had been raised. Even as the first British troops were coming ashore, a much larger Patriot force was gathering. This brings us to our document and my discussion with John. I'm here with John Reznikoff. John is the owner of University Archives, located right here in Wilton, which deals with all sorts of fascinating documents and historical artifacts. It's a pleasure to have you here, John.
Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. And I want to talk to you about this fascinating document that you've discovered, which is correspondence between General Wooster and General Silliman right before the Battle of Ridgefield. So could you tell me how you first discovered this document?
So I spent a lot of time looking through auction catalogs and going on the internet and searching, and I found a small auction that mostly deals in World War II memorabilia and things that I don't mess around with, like Nazi memorabilia even. But in that auction, I recognized this one listing, and it said Battle of Danbury, and it was a very short and brief description. But as I read further, I knew it was something special, and I said, oh, I have to buy this.
Mm-hmm. So how did you actually know that it was something special reading through?
Well, the date of the document, as we look at it, is April 26th, so it's kind of during when the British landed and, moments before the actual battle. Mm. And, very rarely do you see a document that, here's what I call it, right between the eyes. It is right between the eyes for this historical event.
Mm-hmm. And I believe you mentioned that this is significant because it might be one of the last things that General Wooster wrote right before he was mortally wounded the next day.
Right. So, we have his signature down at the bottom, and he has two offensive against the British. One of them not so lucky because he gets shot. Mm-hmm. And he's sick for a while, dying of his wounds, and eventually expires. And that's May 3rd, I believe. And so based on the date of this, I would surmise, I can't prove it, but his signature is very rare to begin with. I would surmise that this is the very last thing that he ever signed.
Wow, it's fascinating. Yeah. So you talk about his signature. How do you know that it's authentic when you have a document like this?
Well, in essence, what you've asked is what is the title of my job. I have to do the research and make sure that everything's authentic before I could offer it to the public or even donate it. Mm-hmm. And there are known examples that one can find in archives in the Library of Congress, at the Smithsonian, or in auctions that have already happened, you could go back and find an image, and I compare letter per letter, word per word, the handwriting and the signature to make sure it's authentic before I offer it.
Mm-hmm. So with something like this, how often do you find items from the Battle of Ridgefield or the Rain on Danbury? Are they common items?
They're very uncommon. I gave a few items to the Westport Historical Society that were more Westport related, but they're always usually after the fact. Mm-hmm. So what you find is we need $20 to pay for these doctors who handled the wounded at the battle, and it's usually like a couple months afterwards. Mm-hmm. From my experience, there's almost nothing that exists from the time of the battle. Mm-hmm. So other than this,
fascinating. So how important is it when you find a document like this to be able to preserve it so that people can? I mean, you're someone who deals in historic documents. How vital is it that we make sure that these get preserved so people can study them?
Well, I think I have to quote Dos Passos, and I always use this quote: "Those who know not of history are doomed to repeat it." Mm-hmm. And we need to preserve our history, and that's why we're here today and why you're asking me these questions. Mm-hmm. And it's vital to not only preserve it but share it. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for sharing it with us and sharing it with our audience at home. And we'll be thrilled to be able to display this for generations to come. So, John, thank you.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Silliman and Wooster, along with General Benedict Arnold, quickly gathered local militia in an attempt to counter Tryan, but for the moment, Tryan had the upper hand. Despite heavy rains, an overnight encampment in Weston, and the efforts of a small Patriot force under the command of Colonel Joseph Platt Cook, little delayed the British, who reached Danbury shortly after noon on the 26th, where they set fire to parts of the town and destroyed food and supplies meant for the Continental Army. The British spent the night in Danbury and set out the next morning to head south towards their ships. By now, organized Continental soldiers and militia had arrived south of Danbury and prepared for a fight. 400 men under Silliman and Arnold set up barricades in the center of Ridgefield, while Wooster led another 300 men around the rear of the enemy to harass them as they marched. Wooster attacked twice as the British approached Ridgefield. His first attack scattered the surprised enemy, but a second attack a few miles from the center of Ridgefield was met with ready British cannons. Wooster was wounded and carried off the battlefield. He died 5 days later at Danbury. His last words were reportedly, "I am dying, but with a strong hope and persuasion that my country will gain her independence." Meanwhile, the men at the fortifications in Ridgefield held for almost an hour under an intense artillery barrage, until an all-out assault by well over 1,000 British soldiers overwhelmed the heavily outnumbered militia. As light faded and night took hold, the British made camp again just outside Ridgefield, before resuming their march south in the morning, this time through Wilton along Ridgefield Road. The militia scattered after the battle the previous day now kept up constant fire from behind trees, stone walls, and houses. As they entered Wilton, British troops looted several homes along their path, including 742 Ridgefield Road, the home of Benjamin Keeler, who was actually arrested by the British, and 652 Ridgefield Road, the home of Samuel Keeler IV, who had several cows stolen. At 433 Ridgefield Road, the home of Samuel and Mercy Comstock, Mercy ingeniously laid out a full feast and wine. The enemy soldiers ate and drank their fill, leaving the rest of the home untouched. Thaddeus Sterling's home at 384 Ridgefield Road, Samuel Middlebrook's home at 274 Ridgefield Road, and Daniel Gregory's home at 11 Belden Hill Road were not so fortunate, and were also looted, but not before Daniel's elderly mother threatened them with a fireplace poker. Where I'm sitting now, the Society's Sloane Raymond Fitch House, was not spared either. Home to Wilton militia captain Clapp Raymond, the barn and property of the Raymond family was chosen to hide Patriot supplies from the enemy. Unfortunately, the British route back to shore led them right to the hidden cache, and a collection of weapons, ammunition, and other supplies were destroyed, and the Raymond family barn partially burned. The British continued down Danbury Road and onto Westport Road before they took a slight detour onto Dudley Road. There, the home of Wilton Militia Lieutenant Seth Abbott was also looted. A brief Patriot attack, led by Colonel Jedediah Huntington, took place on Chestnut Hill in South Wilton, where 6 men were wounded. Pushing on, the British encountered and defeated a regrouped Patriot force under Benedict Arnold near Campo Beach, before they boarded their ships and sailed back to New York City. Overall, the raid had accomplished its mission of destroying Patriot supplies in Danbury. However, in the long term, the plan backfired. Outraged by the assault on their homes, the Connecticut populace found new resolve in fighting the British. Thousands of Connecticut men enlisted in the aftermath of the fighting, and discouraged by the constant resistance they had encountered during their march, the British never launched an expedition so far into inland Connecticut for the rest of the war. As always, thanks for watching. Remember to keep your fireplace pokers close, just in case of enemy attack, and stay tuned for more history.